Hope you're all staying safe out there. The apocalypse has come.
This is our last broadcast.
President Trump has been arraigned, and the world may come to an end today. Welcome back to the Liberty Portal podcast. I am your host and producer, Joe Sheehan, and with me I have a special cast of characters, including David Rand. How are you, sir?
I'm doing great, everybody. David Rand here. You can find me on Twitter at Liberty Rand.
And today, a very special guest, Russell Herbst, brother of David Rand. How are you, Dave? Russell, whoever you are.
Good.
Good. We're going to get more into you. We're going to get more out of you, but we'll move on for now. Kyle, what's up, dude?
Hey, Captain Quigley on Twitter. I am here sharing a spot with Russell here. But yeah, what's up, everybody?
Getting cozy over there. Evan on the ones and twos. Thank you for doing the hard work, sir. Well, so the former president of the United States has been arraigned today in court over the documents he took from the White House, and that literally just happened today. So what do we know about it at this point?
Well, we know the law it was under is the 1913 Espionage Act, which I would really love my esteemed colleague / brother to give us maybe some context for. It might be interesting if you know anything about it.
Not a ton, actually.
Russell's a history teacher.
Yes, I am. Not a ton. The reality is that any type of federal law can always apply if you want to make it apply, right? And so the reality is it has to do with secret information. So I mean, there's a billion different things that you could have made this function to. It's just whether or not they chose to do that. So the actual origins of something like that, I mean, World War I, you're talking about the creation of the FBI in itself, right, to find anti-war or the reasons why the United States went into war, and people, and push them into the outskirts of American society so that they can no longer have a voice. And so, the origins of this are ironic, at least, because, that's the origins of the FBI, and then kind of the predecessor to the CIA. That's more of World War II, but, yeah. So, that's pretty ironic in itself.
It totally is. That's wild that we're now finding ourselves where we are.
Well, it's important to note, too, that, for example, Snowden is being pursued under the same act, right? Chelsea Manning, same story. All of the different, leakers to these other acts, these other people that have been very important in the history of the United States when it comes to the intelligence community and understanding what our military is doing in the past decade, 2 decades, have all been prosecuted under this 1913 Espionage Act. So the implication here is what was interesting, beyond just the fact that a former president and current candidate for president, whom is supposed to have special privileges on their free speech rights, isn't immune from laws, obviously, and we wouldn't want that, but is being prosecuted on this, especially given the context that both Hillary Clinton and Biden have both been found to have secret documents held at their private residences.
In Hillary's case, this was the trove of emails on a hard drive, right? And in Biden's case, it was the documents in his Corvette or adjacent to his Corvette in his garage, and,
right,
and other places in Delaware and offices.
Even worse, Hillary Clinton's emails were acquired by the Russians.
Were they really?
Yeah, right. So at least that's the current theory of how WikiLeaks got them was through that. So yes, but her emails, right? Hillary Clinton releases this tweet in response to the arraignment today.
So really what she's saying is...
Which is a throwback.
She
did this before, too.
But you're not. Haha.
Yeah, right.
Well, it's supposed to be pointing out the hypocrisy that, Trump was like a jailer up, and that was like a whole thing during the 2016 election. But it's also, I think there's also another way to read it, which would be that as well, right?
Well, the irony here is that her infraction was actually far worse because it actually fell into the hands of a foreign adversary from the perspective of the intelligence state. Yet she does not get prosecuted, and Trump does.
I think the important thing to note is that her hat swag game is worse than Trump's.
They got to do better.
You can say what you want to say about Trump. He has that old school sailor captain hat, trucker hat thing going on. That's just bad.
That's Photoshop, though, right? That's
I'm pretty sure
in the 90s.
It's got to be.
She's done.
Why are you ruining this for me?
Yeah, but the hat is real. Like the hat is.
You can buy the hat.
No, this is an advertisement.
Please buy
They're
the hat
selling
right
the
now.
hat.
So I was right.
And it was like a year ago when she put out the same tweet. Like it was the same thing.
So I agree with a lot of other people in that I choose my presidents based on the swag. So,
Like a good history teacher should.
Who has the best swag of U.S. presidents?
the only one that's got any merch at all is Trump. And I didn't vote for him.
Wait, you didn't get Bush Reagan that T-shirt when they got up there and remember Jeb? He like opens it up. He's like, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's
remember
weird.
that? Yeah,
Yeah, I do. Actually,
great.
I kind of forgot about that. Yeah,
Sorry to bring it back up. So I know it's a hard memory for everybody.
Yeah, that's all right. I mean, I thought Obama really started the like contemporary marketing game amongst presidential candidates, like because he had wasn't it Shepard Fairey Obey, right? Pretty sure that was his brand. Design the like hope poster,
yeah.
and that was like, I mean, a cultural icon for years.
That's true.
Right?
Everywhere.
But 6 shirts? I don't think so.
I mean, at least the MAGA hat is like, I think that's more of an icon by this point. Like more people will remember that forever than the like hope and change posters.
The rage it builds in people is amazing.
It's wild.
At my school 4 years ago, it was under discussion in our handbook to be banned with the Confederate flag because of the angst it brought in people. It wasn't of that it did anything. It was the reaction that it caused. That they're like, Confederate flag, which, by the way, slavery, and then Trump's red hat.
Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. It's like, the only accomplishment over 4 years.
Russian asset.
Yeah. Oh,
Right. Right.
Is it red for a reason?
Republican Party, red. Russia, red communism.
Communists,
Wow.
commies, dude.
It's quite the correlation there.
And some string in here.
We're over here with a whiteboard back here on our side of the
Doing it
table.
like Glenn Beck style over here. Just like,
Oh my God,
man.
those were the best back in the day.
Just asking questions.
Wow.
Yeah. So, I mean, what does this mean when it comes to the law, right? If you have a presidential candidate who has done something that 2 other presidential candidates have done, additionally to that, with Biden currently facing potential issues with the Burisma story and the Senate campaign or the Senate Judiciary Chairman with a new potential, what I hear is 17 hours of potential evidence in form of phone calls that were recorded by the Burisma executives, recording Biden potentially taking bribes. That is a lot going on when it comes to the justice system. And the question is for the American people, what does the law mean? And does it apply to everyone? Like the idea of a republic, the core idea of a republic is that the law is above the politicians. So there's no king that sits above the law, that the politicians make the law and are then subject to it. And so if it applies to you and me, Chelsea Manning and Edward Snowden, and it applies to Trump apparently because he has the wrong think, but not to certain other groups of people, what does that mean?
I think it seems pretty obvious to me what it means, and that is that certain classes or individuals of people within the United States are protected, are not investigated, and you have to ask yourself why. I think it's probably a bit of a trope at this point that the right seems to think that the entire intelligence state kind of works for the Democrats. We've discussed this before, but at this point, there's a bit of evidence to suggest that.
But it depends on the type. Like, it's not a Republican Democrat thing. Like, there's plenty of people on the Republican side that also get the kid gloves, right? Like, it's the neocon establishment types, right? They
Fair.
also get that. And there's a ton of people on the left that were also getting banned from Twitter and getting banned from all these places. And it's usually the ones that go against the intelligence state. It's usually the ones that are anti-war. Like, those are the ones that tend to get this terrible treatment. They when people divide it with, it's like, okay, are you team red or team blue? Like, you're not getting the entire picture here of what's going on with who gets the kid gloves and who doesn't.
Right. I think Matt Taibbi and Michael Schellenberger are good examples of that, right? Because they're, self-avowed lifelong Democrats. And, Michael Schellenberger was an environmental activist. He was, worked for Soros for years.
Matt Taibbi wrote a book called Clown President that was just dissing Trump.
Right.
He's not like a Trump supporter, right?
And they're dragged before Congress and threatened, and the IRS visits, Taibbi's home after their testimony in front of Congress. So you're right. I think you're right. It's not a right versus left paradigm so much as it is a Are you with the establishment, or are you not with the establishment kind of division?
Yeah, it's in some ways it might be like new aristocracy versus old aristocracy. Is like there's a new aristocracy that's being formed right now, and you got to stamp out that so that we can maintain power. Like I think that's generally the way to look at it right now. And you're seeing kind of the new aristocracy starting to rise up. You have like these new figures coming up, and some of them are people from the old that have kind of defected, and those people might be Trump or RFK Jr. But then we have these Tucker Carlson's kind of like like that. He comes from that history. But then you have like these new figures, these new influencers, these new politicians that are on the rise as well, and they're getting all the treatment.
Mm-hmm. If you are a small business owner looking for exponential growth, you have to connect with Adam Thuen at Intellectual Patriots. He will revolutionize your business game and help you get to the next level. Adam can streamline your business practices and advertising strategies to improve your bottom line. His expertise in data engineering means he can build you the systems you need to collect and analyze market data. His mission is to provide you with invaluable insights to fuel your success, from grant writing and business proposals to digital systems integrations, even AI management. Intellectual Patriots is a one-stop shop for cutting-edge solutions. Don't wait another second. Visit intelpatriots.com to learn more. That's INTEL patriots.com. How else would you characterize the new aristocracy idea? Because I think that you're right about that. I think there is this new wave of people who are becoming influential that is probably much to the chagrin of the existing establishment in media and politics, industry, etc. What are the other parameters there? Like, who else is included in that list, if you can think of any?
I think Elon Musk is somebody kind of in the corporate world that's trying to elevate a lot of new aristocracy folks. I think that's what a lot of the Twitter stuff was. I think you're seeing the rise of new influencers with kind of new think that are kind of, you're not supposed to talk about, people, like this might be kind of a weird one to put in here, but people like the Andrew Tate moment, that's kind of like a new wave of thinking, or old wave that's become new, but it's kind of like, you got to shut him up because he's doing all these things that are going against the norms of the old aristocracy. I think guys like Vivek Ramaswamy are going to be on the rise figures. I don't think his presidential campaign is going to really go anywhere this go around, but I think he's going to be somebody that's around for decades, right? And he's going to have, his influence is going to be the people that he inspires now, and those are going to be like the teenagers and 20-year-olds that are going to do stuff 20 years from now, right?
Where do you put Ron DeSantis between new and old?
He's establishment. I don't like the word establishment. I like blob and anti-blob.
So sophisticated.
Yeah, right. It's just establishment, because establishment is like, it's also associated with whether or not you hold power. Well, there's a whole group of people who hold power that aren't in this category. Thomas Massey is not part of the blob, right? But the Speaker of the House is maybe part of the blob. The Senate Minority Leader is definitely part of the blob, right? So I think the difference is, I think culture might make sense. Like it's more sensible to think of it like a culture of, how do we think about the role of government and the role that DC should play in the average American life and around the globe? And there's a group of people who think that should be a very expansive role. And there's a group of people who are generally saying shouldn't be the role. I mean, and the funny thing about that is that you could apply Tulsi Gabbard to that new aristocracy type as a figure, while also putting Jordan Peterson in there, when they'd probably disagree on a lot, or any other amount of conservative figures. The question is how do you see that role as the kind of pivoting factor? Because that's a lot where the money also wedges into that space, with everything from the military-industrial complex to what we see with the Burisma scheme in Biden, where money flows through these patterns in these channels internationally. People take advantage of that, use it both on, I forget what street is, Congressional Street in DC, and on K Street, the Lobby Street. So each one of those are kind of like the synergistic, market economy for political dollars that creates these incentives to stir for a very interventionist foreign policy. Also, that of course Trump disrupts, or to basically use immigration as a political football forever, but never actually do anything. He tries to disrupt things like that really put him on the outside as a pariah. I don't think we have the evidence necessarily. I think people are understandably making the correlation between him being prosecuted and not the people within the blob being prosecuted. It had something to do with that dynamic. And I think that's a reasonable conclusion. We don't know that. Not like we know 2 + 2 = 4, but I think we have a good sense of like you can hold it with a bit more certainty than you can a lot of other things.
Well, and there's certain things like with everything that was going on in New York like a month ago. Remember the sexual assault charges or whatever was happening there?
Yeah. Well, that was campaign finance charges.
What was the thing with the?
It's hush money, campaign finance.
Yes,
Yeah.
hush money for that. That's right.
Yeah.
Because like the reason why that came forward was that woman really helped push for a law to get passed in New York so that these things that the statute of limitations wasn't going to be a thing for a year, so people could bring their charges forward. But then after a year, it's like, no, that's not happening anymore. Like, wasn't that the dynamic that happened there?
Oh,
there was like some law that got pushed. But it's one of those things where you look at that and you're like, well, I think that this is clearly like there's something very political that's going on right here, so that this lady can bring this thing forward, so that we have headlines that come for Trump, right? It's stuff like that happens, which should kind of be raising alarm bells to people.
Additionally, and then there's the institutional factor, right? Trust in American institutions have been declining for a long time. There's a natural process that I think is and I wonder what you think about this historically, Russ. Like a natural process of faith in institutions as you're building them, as you're using them for your common defense, as there's like a clear purpose for them, and then like a decay of institutions where institutions, start to be the self-licking ice cream cone that exist for their own existence, say they're no longer feasible, no longer, they don't have a point anymore. For example, there's literally thousands of people who work at the Department of Agriculture, thousands and thousands. What are they doing? Writing checks. I don't know what they're doing. I have no idea. But, institutions exist, start to decay, and then you have to revivify or end or find new ways to build trust with the public by having institutions that solve problems. And so this is just like another, huge nail in the coffin of the institutions of the Department of Justice. Because if you don't apply the law equally, what is the law? Am I right about the institution thing?
Yeah, I was I was just trying to remember, for a while there, I couldn't remember, but Warren J. Harding, his administration, so this is post-World War I, post-Wilson, so Woodrow Wilson, then Warren G. Harding, and then he dies in office, and then you get Calvin Coolidge, then the whole 20s and all that. But he ran on a campaign slogan, which I was trying to remember, and I was trying to will it to you to Google, but you didn't get the
I didn't get the telepathic communication here.
Yeah. But the campaign slogan went something like it was like back to America, old America, basically, right?
Sounds like Make America Great
Yeah,
Again,
it's very close. And his administration was racked with scandals. And
the Teapot Dome, right?
Teapot Dome.
Sorry,
yeah.
I looked up Calvin Coolidge, and that was Keep Cool with Coolidge. but yeah, it was Warren G. Harding.
Dude, if your last name's Coolidge, you got to do that slogan. Like you gotta,
cool cow, buddy.
It didn't even mean the same thing though. What did it mean? Did cool have the same meaning in that time period that it did now?
I
thought that was slang that came in like the 1960s.
Oh, that's a good question.
Cool.
I don't know that actually.
You know how I know that? Remember the Titans.
Return to normalcy is what you're looking for.
There we go. Return to normalcy.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of scandal, right? And he was a ladies' man. There's a connection there. He had affairs on his train. He had his own personal train. He was a relatively wealthy individual. There's a lot of connections you can make to Trump. Actually, now that I was sitting there thinking about it.
And also, JFK was also had a lot of like the ladies' man thing that was going on.
And also
on.
a similar kind of reactionary movement on the opposite party, obviously, but in this case, Warren G. Harding was a Republican, so it's the same party. But and I think to the point of World War I, 1917 Espionage Act, and all of that, like there was a sense of, have we gone too far? We need an outsider. Warren G. Harding was that, and to change things up and to mix these things up when the faith in institutions had been deeply lost, because there was nothing like World War I to break people's belief in the goodness of government. It wasn't as a big of an effect, if I'm understanding it correctly, as it was in like Germany or like England or France. but it still was. I mean, the massive slaughter of, the Marne and things like that just completely woke people up that these people don't care about you. They will murder you and your kids to stay in power and to get what they want. And in the case of World War I, in I think it was 1932, there was a Republican senator from South Dakota that started a commission to look into the origins of World War I. And so, I mean, this is decades later of what we're talking about, but I think this is kind of the same effect, that people are looking into these elections and into these what's going on with the intelligence agencies. And we're just going to continue to have these because the faith in the institutions is degraded, like you're saying. And they're trying to either replace them or maintain them far beyond people's actual belief in them. And so you're just going to continue to have these things.
That made me think of something. So at the time, and I'm thinking the interwar period, was skepticism over the legitimacy of the Sink and Lusitania as a cause for World War I, was that mainstream or was that very fringe? What was that kind of ratio?
Pretty mainstream, I would say.
Skepticism was?
Yes. At the time.
Sorry, I just flicked a pencil at Russ for some reason. He didn't answer right. He's
like, that's not the answer I was looking for.
It's French. It was pretty mainstream because, like I said, in the 1920s and 30s, there was massive anti-war reaction to what happened in World War I. I mean, and think about this, right? It was so strong that during the 20s and the 30s, we have this massive pushback against the entire progressive era imperialism. We start to give back a lot more sovereignty to the Philippines. We start to give back a lot more sovereignty to Puerto Rico. We start to withdraw from China in a massive way. Now, it doesn't mean we're all the way withdrawn. We're not. But we are withdrawing all the way through the 20s and the 30s. And guys, I mean, and think about the steps that we're taking in Europe in 1939, right? Those are pretty, I mean, the invasion of Poland, the invasion of France, in America is full on against, FDR's will, saying no. And we won't even let you lend stuff to the British, right? I think it's the Atlantic Compact. They're like, no, you cannot sell them things. You cannot do anything. And so then FDR's workaround is they'll pay us eventually, maybe. Then I'm not selling it, kind of deal. And it's so, I mean, the anti-war sentiment from World War I was so strong that, I mean, they're staring down the barrel of Nazi Germany taking over Europe, and America's sitting in its corner, sitting on its hands, being like, "That's not our problem." And it very much was, but that's how strong the sentiment was. And the primary group blamed for it was the bankers. And so I think similarly in this situation, what you see is that there's a primary group that they're blaming for this dissolving of trust in the federal government, and they constantly blame Trump for that, right? And then the other side blames the other side for that, and the reality is just nobody has faith in it.
Well, I think the reality is it's both sides' fault. I mean, as we've talked about, for example, within the context of the debt ceiling, it doesn't matter what party is in the White House, the national debt and the deficit just keep going up,
right?
And there are other problems that aren't addressed. Decay of infrastructure, military spending overseas. There are things that just no matter what, even the president campaigns on, during election season, you get into office and it just doesn't change.
Yeah. I mean, if you look at it like this, there's plenty of things that, we can praise Trump for on policy and things like that we like. When it comes to spending, he had 4 years and he was the biggest deficit spender in American history.
And it'll happen with each president too. It'll keep going up and up. And
it has to. It literally has to.
It's a decision. These are the decisions that
But there's also
keep in mind,
an
guys,
element
we cut
too.
the budget under Clinton, right?
Sure.
At least held budget spending relatively low compared to the growth of revenue. But for a long enough period of time to get a budget surplus, it can happen.
Sure. Hashtag I'm with him.
We deregulated the airlines under Carter. There's all kinds of things that can happen outside of those alignments.
And that came with that was fairly bipartisan, right? If I remember right, the Democrats were kind of mad at Clinton for doing that. It was like a Republican like it was the Republican deal, and then Clinton signed on to it, kind of.
Well, they split the Democrat Party to make it happen because but Republicans controlled Congress at the time, right? So the 1994 revolution happened, and there were some Democrats who were on board, but for the most part, it was a Republican-run thing. But Clinton was always a centrist who needed to get job done in order to build the Clinton machine, right? So he made
a bunch of compromises basically in order to build that,
right? And then now Democrats take credit for the surplus that happened in the year 2000.
Yeah, people always take credit for depending on the president that was in there. It's never like who was in Congress that were making.
Never mind how it was
happen,
done.
right?
It was done by cutting spending, and then of course Trump not only got more revenue after Tax Cuts and Jobs Act than what they had beforehand. So Tax Cuts and Jobs Act happened, revenue actually continues to increase even though those are cutting rates. This happens because the economy grew, right? And that's how it works. So whether or not it was a Laffer curve phenomenon, I'm open to, but it's still a question of, even with the increased revenue, they increased spending so much more than that revenue that they went further in the debt. All they had to do was just hold debt or spending consistent, and they would have had a surplus.
Well, Trump did go into personal bankruptcy at least a couple times, didn't he? So
no
one's here to say he's very fiscally responsible necessarily.
He ain't Ross Perot, that's for sure.
The real estate game is just a gamble. He's just gambling throughout all of it.
Yeah. Well, he got himself to the White House, so I guess that's probably the most coveted piece of real estate in politics. Yeah.
No, he said it was kind of a trashy house. If I remember right. Of course, remember when he came in, he's just like, no, my place is way better than this.
It's no Trump Tower, folks. No Trump Tower.
So the Trump of like 50 years from now is going to be a crypto trader. Right? They're going to be like, yeah, made all my money on crypto and bet the boss bought the best coins.
They're all getting washed up onto the shores of San Juan lately. All these people.
Do we want to go
There's
there?
some rabbit holes if you want to go to.
Yeah. Maybe in a future conspiracy episode.
Dude, the conspiracy.
A lot of planes crashing lately.
So on similar on other presidential candidates, Justin Amash had a really interesting Substack last week. Basically saying, Ron DeSantis, who is running for president now, what's his campaign slogan?
I'm not Trump.
Forgettable. That's what it is. It's forgettable. No, it's like the Great American Revival or something like that. Justin Amash served with him, and Justin Amash was a Republican congressman who, under the Trump investigation and other sorts of things, left the Republican Party. He was an LP, Libertarian Party sitting congressman for like 18 months or something, and then he didn't run for re-election out of Michigan.
The highest office LP's ever held.
Yeah, but the Justin Amash is legitimately a very sound philosophical person when it comes to economy, civil liberties, foreign policy, things like that. He's not Ron Paul, but he's quite excellent, and he's an excellent communicator, and I really like him. So, anyways, he wrote an article on his Substack that he has now that you can get to about his time serving with Ron DeSantis and his impressions of it. One of the things that happened. Most of the actions of Congress happen behind the scenes. They don't happen in people's full view. So if you look at a scorecard, what you're seeing is a pre-negotiated. The scorecard's not negotiated, but the bill that comes up is pre-negotiated, right? We've covered this a lot when it comes to process on the podcast. A tremendous amount of the process determines what gets to the floor, not like open process like the Montana legislature or other state legislators where if something passes committee, it must go to the floor. So a tremendous amount of this is all pre-negotiated, and therefore any score or any kind of assessment by outside groups has already gone through that lens. And it's very difficult to actually get a measurement just on their hard votes. So what he gave is a more qualitative assessment of Ron DeSantis. And what was interesting about that is, and I quote, he was most reliable on basic economic matters like spending bills, and least reliable on subjects like war, civil liberties, including surveillance and privacy. So I think that's interesting, especially as a lot of people on the right, it looks seriously at DeSantis and think, well, he did a good job as Florida governor, and kind of using that as a full marker of his total political philosophy. And I think that would be very unwise, especially because presidency is not governor. Presidency's number one job is foreign policy. Mm-hmm. And if your foreign policy is bad, the rest of it follows from there. The most important issue right now in America is not even the debt limit, guys. It's the threat of nuclear war with Russia, the greatest stockpile of nukes on the planet. And that confrontation we have with them, potential confrontation, escalatory spiral we're currently in, where Russia is writing articles this week about how Moscow is now a frontline, city in this war because of drone attacks and attacks into the country from Ukraine. Although that says it's from Ukraine, while other sources are saying Ukraine denies that they're actually in control of it, and it's all plausible deniability. So what do I mean by all that? Think carefully about who you're going to vote for president, Republicans, please, God. Because if this guy is a blob member, that would be very bad for the country.
This episode is brought to you by our friends at Zesty Beverages. They're on a mission to the standard American diet by crafting drinks with fewer calories and more nutrients from real food. Their lineup of delicious offerings now includes Electric Peak Yerba Mate, postbiotic sodas, keto-friendly, ready-to-drink margaritas, and hard teas. Wondering what a postbiotic soda is? Well, head on over to zestybev.com to learn more and find a retailer near you. Once again, check them out online at zestybev.com. That's zestybev.com. Well, I mean, his polling numbers look worse than they were when he announced, at least in relation to Trump.
I didn't know that.
It looks like Trump has increased his spread in first place as likely nominee for the Republicans at this point, which obviously, as we've said before, this far out doesn't mean a lot, but it's not a trend in the right direction for Ron DeSantis' campaign, which frankly I think is a good thing. I mean, he set a good example, is setting a good example as governor of Florida. Through COVID, yeah, you could say he was pro-lockdown until he was anti-lockdown, but like they were at least leading the charge in responding to, the studies that showed that things were, needed readdressing when it comes to our policy response to the pandemic. And I think he's been able to do good things there and create somewhat of like an archetype that other states can follow, right? That can look to and say, okay, at least I don't have to be leading the charge on this radical policy. I've got Florida to look to, and it's working. And they're a populous state. They're not an outlier, kind of like Montana or whatever. I think he's got more positive impact to have there, and probably much more downside risk to the country and probably to his own political career as president. That's just me personally.
Yeah.
Well, and a lot of the support, like when I just talked to like the average Republican voter in my own life, like say a year ago before DeSantis ever announced he was running, but everybody was just kind of like, he's probably going to run kind of a thing. A lot of the sentiment generally was like, I voted for Trump. I liked Trump. I'm kind of over the moment. And look at what happened in Florida. I kind of like that, right? Like that was always kind of the sentiment right now. But then now I think as time has gone on and people are seeing DeSantis a little bit more, they're looking at him and they're like, he doesn't have the same energy of Trump. They still want that energy that Trump had, and they're like, and then there's like a few things here or there, which is, I think some of the Ukraine stuff, he's been kind of wishy-washy on that. Some of the indictment stuff with Trump, DeSantis has been kind of wishy-washy on that stuff. And everybody that's kind of like, they're like looking at him and they're like, I don't know. I don't feel it anymore. Like they had this vision of him, and now that he's actually out there, they're not seeing that vision anymore. It's the same thing as like I said on the podcast, is I actually think one of the biggest things that the average voter will look at on DeSantis is he's kind of like nerdy. He's got this like nerd voice about him, and he's just kind of like, he's kind of got like a weird.
He's kind of see, like he's kind of got that in his from 1930s. Is that what he is?
No, but like when he talks, he sounds like that, and it's one of those things. Is like the gig at the end of the day is like this talking gig, and he doesn't have the charisma of a Trump. Like Trump is just like throwing out one-liners, calling people names, everybody that you hate, right? Like, and I think the average voter is like looking at that and they're like, I guess we'll throw it at Trump again. Like they're kind of looking at it like that.
Right. I think the reality is that the modern presidency is a charisma game. It's an actor's job, right? And if you can't fit that role perfectly and say just at least the appropriately right thing to get your group to feel like they have the one up, you're in a tough position.
And Trump understands show business, and that's what it is, exactly. Right?
I think the reality is that since the 1940s, it's progressively became more and more of a showbiz position. I mean, in every history book I've ever taught from, I've ever even looked at, actually, one of the primary points about
television, right,
is television. But one of the primary points about Reagan was the wit, the old Gipper wit, right?
The great communicator.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. So I think it's more than the actuality of it. It's our current understanding of that's what the job is. You know, it's this person to say the right things at the right time, to say the right thing, and then magically the stock market hockey sticks for reasons. Right.
Totally. Well, I mean, it is sort of a PR role, like communicating what's going on in the government to the American people and to the rest of the world. You know, as we've talked about before, like the U.S. does lead the world, and the world looks to the U.S. in so many ways, culturally, politically, otherwise. It is kind of like that. But it raises an interesting hypothetical, and I want to pose this to you guys because it popped into my head, and I'm just going to ask you. If you could pick one actor to be president, living or dead, I'll say living or dead, who would it be?
Easy. Got it. Morgan Freeman.
Tight.
Oh, that's good. That's
God.
a good choice.
He's God.
Oh, man, he is.
In my
Bruce
classroom,
Almighty.
I have 2 quotes. I have this pantheon of awesome that rings my room in my whiteboard. So you know how back in the day you always had like presidents, right? Like in like their faces would ring that. So I made my own, but they're people that I like and people I find challenging, right? With really good quotes next to them. And I have Morgan Freeman. He has these 2 sick quotes about victimhood and about self-actualization. And then underneath it has just God. I just wrote God. It's like,
That is nice.
every once in a while, a student's like, who is that? I'm like, how dare you blaspheme?
Is that Nelson Mandela?
He's also on the wall, actually. Yeah, he has an amazing quote about being a prisoner if everything is insane. Like, if you make people illegal, we have a nation of prisoners. That's pretty good.
Well,
Whoa. Yeah, you guys got to come in my classroom sometime. It's pretty sick.
Obviously.
field trip to Russell's class.
Just do it.
All right, actors as president.
I can't really think of an actor that I'd be like, yeah, but like, I think you are raising an interesting point of, I think as society is continuing to shift, just largely, I think a lot of them are just technological reasons. That actor archetype is going to be more and more what we see as our future leaders, right? And, you know, Trump is an example of this. Like, he's not an actor, but he's TV personality,
He's an
right?
actor.
But yeah, like he's a show business guy. Like, yeah, he plays a role, right, on TV, and he played a role. You know, it's the same thing. Like, look in Ukraine. Zelensky was a TV comedian too, right? Like, we're seeing more and more of that type of stuff kind of come up, and we start to see more people floating ideas of celebrities. Like, it's like, oh, The Rock or Oprah or whatever, you know. Like, so I think that we are going to see that trend more and more, just because we live in this attention economy and everybody's focused on, you know, who has the biggest influence on Twitter or Instagram or something like that.
You know who'd be great? Not an actor, but definitely is in show business. Excellent communicator and super badass. Dana White, president of the UFC, would make it a great
Oh my
presidential
God.
candidate. He would slay.
Leave it to a bald guy to suggest Dana White as president.
I got to support my fellow balds, man.
And Dana White is he is very much, like, politically speaking, a very
Yeah.
anti-establishment figure who has
Yeah.
also had his fair share of allegations thrown his way too,
dude,
right?
that's a
And
good
that is
pick.
because he is a
That's a good
culturally relevant person,
Well,
right?
and additionally to that, like, the amount of people, like, specifically the voters that the Republicans need that are in the demographic of the UFC is pretty substantial. I mean, lower middle income white dudes, you know.
Joe Rogan running mate, perhaps?
Yeah, Joe Rogan would be
Well,
great.
no, he would just be like, he becomes state media under Dana White, right?
Just NPR just becomes the Joe Rogan podcast.
Just starts funding the podcast. Just degenerate comedians coming on state media.
I love it.
It's
Well, I mean, I don't know if this is even going to happen, but I mean, speaking of comedians, like the LP seems to be flirting with the idea of running Dave Smith, or he seems to be flirting with that, or
he has been for a year.
I don't know
or two
who's
now, right?
actually like substantiating that, because obviously, I guess like any good pre-announced candidate, he's been avoiding the question altogether. Doesn't seem to me like he's terribly enthusiastic about the idea. Like, he might do it just to bring some notoriety to the party. But I mean, what do you think about a Dave Smith candidacy? Do you think that would have any impact?
One thing to note that you legally can't announce until you're fiscally available to.
Oh, wow.
Because then your time changes and the filing changes and all, like, there's like tremendous
It
amounts.
also
of-
changes his podcast stuff. Like, he's made jokes about this on his podcast, talking about, like, you know, is like, I can't talk about this because of, he makes it humorous, but because of government regulations about things.
The
and stuff like that,
FEC
right?
is tremendously like consequential when it comes to speech in that area. Because the minute that you are an announced candidate, it has implications on all your finances, and they will go after you. They're very prosecutorial.
Interesting.
So So I'm saying that to my boy Dave is obviously being very smart by not doing that, and it's not just you have to do it with a wink and a nod. That's just the nature of it, because of the way the government works. How would he do? Yeah, well, I mean, look, I'm in the situation where I like anytime someone can get on and articulate sound money and free market and anti-war positions like that. I'm for it. Whatever stage we can get on to do that, because that will save the country. Right? That's at least what will save the country.
It would be
minimum.
It would be wild to see him on a debate stage with presidential candidates.
Yeah, not gonna happen.
He's you know, like it wouldn't happen, but it would be
actually
wild.
Take off the gloves. I would.
That would be delicious.
I would buy all the yard signs.
It would be wild to watch.
My neighborhood would be very mad at me, but it would just be yard signs.
No, they wouldn't. They'd be like, "Oh, there goes Russ. He's crazy."
Well, I think his mental model is correct about running as I think his mental model is correct about running as a third party, of like going in with the complete expectation that obviously you're not going to win, but you're just like spreading a message, and you can kind of use it as a way of bullying the other parties into certain positions and stuff.
Right.
Like I think that is the correct approach, and he's right about that.
When it's actually proving to be correct, Libertarian Party of, I can't remember where, I think I sent it to you, Joe. Yeah, Colorado Libertarian Party has released, GOP has released an announcement saying that they will stay, that they've made an agreement with the Libertarian Party that if they run free market, limited government, pro-peace candidates, that the Libertarian Party will not run against them.
Wow.
Right. And this is exactly what we saw. Montana Republican or Libertarian Party did something similar, not with an agreement, but they very specifically said, we are not endorsing the candidate running against Matt Rosendale because he's doing great on sound money and sound foreign policy. And, it sets up an incentive structure for your third party to actually matter when it comes to where they run, how they run, all that kind of stuff. So there's two parts of that. One, if you get the messaging platform. Two, you can use that messaging platform to pressure the party closest to you into adopting your positions. That was always the purpose of the Libertarian Party. You can look at Murray Rothbard talking about the launch of the party in the 1960s. You can find it on YouTube, and he's very specifically says the purpose of this is to be the far right anchor. I don't remember use right, but like a wing party anchor to draw other parties towards us, because otherwise they lose electoral viability.
That's the counterbalance to communist or some other sort of very authoritarian.
And to hold them accountable, because if you don't hold true to your values, then people leave and they go to a competitive party according to those principles and values. Yeah. And I see the GOP can become sensitive to that, and obviously is becoming more sensitive to that because of the role that Gary Johnson played and other played. And then on the Senate level, played in the Herschel Walker race and other races around the country where the Libertarian was above the margin.
So also think about Dave Smith running right now is like, think about the media apparatus that would come around him. Like all the independent media, like he'll be on Joe Rogan once a month, like, throughout a campaign. Right. Mm. And that's gigantic audience. Like it's a good avenue of like actually spreading the general message about what the problems are right now. Like if the LP was going to run anybody, in my opinion, it should be Dave Smith. That'll get a lot of flack from certain libertarian wings of the party and everything like that. I don't really care about your party, but it's like,
I'm not a Libertarian Party partisan, mm-hmm. But I actually disagree with Dave Smith on some issues. Like I think pretty strongly. I mean, the more he comes out with his immigration point of view, the more I'm like,
What have you heard that you disagree with?
He had an entire episode on kind of unpacking his points of view on immigration, and I find it to be ill-defined and not really well thought through, in my opinion. I don't mean that in a derogatory way. I'm sure he's thought through it, but I think he's coming to a conclusion that's contradictory to his principles.
How so?
Can you disagree with that, actually. Okay. I find pretty much all sides of the immigration debate to be kind of ill-defined.
Sure, me too.
I never know what people are talking about when they're like closed borders, open borders, all these things, right?
Yep.
And my understanding of Dave Smith's argument is just that that the people that like the big problem that he is seeing is just like there's public property. Like that's the big problem here that exists. And if everything was in like the perfect libertarian society where everything was like privately owned and blah, 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 all this stuff, right? Then it would be very clearly, it's just like everybody would be able to define their own borders. But the problem right now is because there's all this public property that we have this weird like tragedy of the commons. We don't have clear definitions of things right now. So like in that way, people of a nation should be able to kind of close off their immigration if they want to, and or not, right? Like there should be like an option there. But like he's saying that we live in an imperfect society right now, so it's a very muddy, complicated issue.
Yeah.
Right?
So like if you're going to go muddy, complicated issue and assume the state first, then your best policy for driving in the direction of greater human prosperity is a liberalized immigration system. I'm not going to use open border or closed border. What I mean by liberalized is if you can move to a place, and I'm talking about the old liberal system, the system that we had for over 100 years in this country. If you move to a place and if you don't have a disease, you have a job or a job prospect or tradable skills, and you're not a criminal, welcome aboard.
See, I don't think Dave Smith would disagree with that.
Absolutely, he disagrees with that.
I know.
Because the guy he's debating on this, Alex Norris, that's his position, right? So like Alex from Cato Institute is not some guy who's saying, you know what's great? Illegal immigration. We need more of it. He's literally poking at he's tilting at a windmill on that.
See, the thing that frustrates me with the immigration argument, especially like the interlibertarian immigration argument, which is like whatever,
sure,
is like I think it often comes down to misunderstood definitions and people just like throwing words around that are kind of meaningless. Like it is like these words like open borders and things like, because like that's how the debate comes, is like, are you closed border or are you open border?
Yeah,
and it's like
totally
it's so much more nuanced than that.
Yeah,
and so it ends up being this weird narrative.
So almost no. Okay, so the best thing you can do,
anything.
what ticks me off about it is if you're a closed border, the best thing you could do is liberalize the immigration system
to make it easier to come into the country legally.
Okay.
Which
Russ,
think
what
Dave
happens when you ban
would
guns? Do they just disappear?
Yes.
They just dematerialize like Thanos, you know, just,
Yep.
Yeah, you snap it and all the guns
That's what
disappear.
the ATF does.
Right. So when
That's
you
what they did to all those people in Ruby.
when you set immigration caps,
Too dark?
when you say,
Sorry.
Yes, but I like it.
oh, you got to go there. So when you set immigration caps, like when you say this amount of people from this industry can come in and everything above that is now illegal, and there's a market demand for everything above that, you've created an incentive for illegal immigration. The real cause, the biggest cause of illegal immigration is jobs that have a comparative advantage that immigrants could fulfill that they otherwise can't. The other one is the drug war, right? So drug war, labor caps. Way down the list is like border enforcement. And border enforcement is important. It happened too. Like a good example, in the 1970s, we had a program called the Becerra program. The Becerra program increased border enforcement while it liberalized the labor markets. That's open borders, right? What it says is like it's open to come here. Now, it doesn't mean maximizing illegal immigration is what people seem to think that's what open borders means. Now, I don't have to use that word. I don't care. I'm not an open borders guy. Fine. I'm gonna liberalize the labor markets and actually solve the problem.
Like I think this is where the arguments stem from.
But that's where Cato's at. Cato, I'm articulating Cato's position.
No, but like what I'm saying is I don't think Cato's articulating their position well, because that's not what I get as a libertarian listening to that.
I don't know about that. Like I don't. Cato, I mean, Dave Smith is challenging that guy to a debate because they disagree. So what do they disagree about?
And like I think Dave might be also falling into this trap, because like he's getting bombarded with internet people, right? Like saying things, and people are using terms like open borders, whatever that means. Like, but it's the same thing as like people just calling like you always say, I'm going to use the F word, fascism. Like it's the same thing where it's like closed borders and open borders becomes this terminology where it's like this weird concept in the sky, and everybody's just pulling from it what they want to pull from it, whether good or bad. And these words don't actually mean anything anymore. And until you actually get into the nuts and bolts and things. So what you end up getting is whenever these debates happen between these people is everybody's talking past each other because nobody's using the same definitions anyways, which is how politics always works, right? Like this is Republican Democrat too, right? Like it's the same thing.
I totally agree. I actually agree with all those points about how muddy the waters are and all that kind of stuff. What ticks me off about the issue is that all of a sudden it's become that the libertarian position is unclear. And I think it's absolutely clear. I don't see how you can have a vision for a private.
It's clear.
Well, I mean, in the sense of from the philosophy. I mean, like if you have a private property if borders are imaginary, if what matters is individuals and free association and people's ability to say, hey, I wouldn't mind housing you. You're happy. You're welcome to move here. Hey, I wouldn't mind employing you. You're happy to move here. And then saying, but because there's a commons and because there's third party effects, we shouldn't have immigration, to me is silly, right? It's like saying, because
but that's the thing is like, I don't think Dave Smith is saying we shouldn't have immigration.
Well, no,
right?
and that's what closed borders means. At least that is the position he articulated on his podcast when he was saying this.
I think people are just they're having associations with words
that he
and
was
they're pulling
open
from what
to
they
reducing
want to have.
legal immigration.
Sure.
Right. And which is I think completely antithetical to the values of a free and open society.
I think we probably need to have Dave Smith on the podcast too.
Yeah.
I'm sure he will.
At least if I understand him
I'm sure he
correctly.
will be at some point.
I really like the guy. I'm not trying to dog on him. I'm just saying that there are some things I disagree with him on, and even then, I would still like him to be the messenger in the sense of someone up there to articulate the things he's great about.
Russ, I'm curious to hear from you on this. Is there any sort of historical context to inform or apply to this question of has there ever been a more optimal immigration policy in the United States or anywhere really for that matter, but specifically since U.S. history is your forte?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What's that?
Yeah, I mean, the history of immigration restriction in this country really goes to the populist and progressive era, just like most governmental things. I feel like it's just a broken record. And the reality is that the first group of people that were heavily restricted formally from coming were Chinese people. And it was to reduce the labor competition coming in from California, the Pacific coast inward. And there's a bunch of historical, racism that's built into that. I mean, China had laws where Chinamen, right, in the parlance of the time, at the time couldn't buy land, so they couldn't get mining claims. So they started laundries, they started other industries there, and did quite well, but didn't stem the flow, right? And that even affected Montana. The second largest Chinese population in the western United States was in Butte. And there's a really great book on it, and I just spaced it. Something under the big sky. It's a kind of stereotypical Montana title. But that's where it really stems. That's where it really starts. I want to say that's 1896-ish, right? Chinese Immigration Act, if somebody wants to look it up, but no big deal if you don't. And then we start to get the Immigration Quota Act in 1921, I believe. And that's when we get our modern immigration state, where we're going to pick and choose based upon, was it? Oh, is that
I'm seeing, well, 1923 is Chinese Immigration Act, and then Chinese Exclusion Act in 1882.
Oh, that's what I meant. 1882. I was off. Sorry about that. But anyway, then in the 1920s, you start to get picking and choosing of different ethnicities and who should be allowed in and not. It's 100% based on a eugenics paradigm that was intertwined in all of the progressive era. There's not a single policy within the progressive era that was not based on a sense of scientific racism, right? And everything from the progressive income tax to the direct election of senators. The reason why they wanted all of those things is because they thought that there was classes of society that would be better off to make those decisions and classes of society that shouldn't, and people we want in the society to make it a more pure society. The idea of social hygiene, and that you have a health of the body politic and all of that. That's all from that era, and that's 100% where immigration is from. There were immigration standards before that, but all of them were basically what Dave had just mentioned. You would have to profess that you're not a criminal. You'd have to show up and go through a health test. You'd have to go up and show that you're capable of having a job. And then if you had like a letter of employment, you had a better chance of getting in. People were rejected in massive numbers, and they were sent back at the cost of the shipper, of the person transporting them. And so most of that got done overseas, where they would pick them up. And so it's kind of, the federal government didn't have to run all of that. They ran some of it. And yeah, so I mean, and across the world, the cornerstone of all immigration policies that I could point out is it's protectionism. It's a limiting of local manufacturing and local jobs. And ever since the Great Depression, there has been a deep need and addiction to illegal labor in the United States that stems from the progressive era and the creation of labor restrictions for the poorest Americans, that they cannot take jobs, they cannot lower their income low enough to compete with illegal labor. So business and even the American public are desperately addicted to it, because how much do you want to pay for an avocado?
That's a really interesting point that I had never put together until you just mentioned it. So like the minimum wage in the United States for a legal laborer, someone who is either here legally from another country or a citizen, prevents them from competing with an illegal immigrant, because that illegal immigrant is off the books. The employer is going to be hiring them under the table at a rate lower than the legal minimum wage in the country, which puts the citizen at a disadvantage.
And even if the wage is actually higher, because you don't have to pay unemployment insurance, you don't have to pay health insurance, you don't have to pay anything else except for that wage. So often, actually, what the studies that I've seen and articles I've seen is that the wage for that illegal immigrant could actually be higher than what an employee might make that's starting off at minimum wage for that job, because there's no other costs in order to draw people that you want.
So that's disadvantaging a citizen while meanwhile creating a vacuum for labor illegally across the border or from other countries.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so
it's primarily not Mexico, right? The average illegal is not from Mexico. They're from Nicaragua, Honduras, places like that travel through Mexico mainly. It's not to mean that there aren't Mexican illegal laborers. I mean, there's Nigerian illegal laborers. People just like awkwardly leave that stuff out. It's not like you just got to cross a border. You just got to get here somehow, right?
Right.
There's
RFK just visited the border and shot that video.
I actually just pulled up that video.
I mean, he was talking about how there's like people represented from, I don't know, like, what did he say? Some high number of countries crossing the border in the last month.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, we can play it here.
Yeah, let's do it.
Hey, everybody, I'm at the border wall around Yuma, Arizona. It's about 2:00 in the morning. We've watched about 150 people come across. You can see the end of the wall down there. And we've watched about 150 people come across in the last hour. The first group were about 50 or 60 people from Africa, from West Africa. This group that is filing behind me right now, we interviewed many of them. They're from Peru, Afghanistan, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Afghanistan, Bangladesh, India, China, Tibet, Nepal, and all together, people have come across right here from 117 nations in the last couple of years. In 3 years, in total, 7 million people have come across the border illegally into our country. And from here, they're put on these buses, and they're brought to the Border Patrol station where they're processed. After 4 or 5 days, they're released on their own recognizance into our country, and most of them are never seen or heard from again. And the stories that we heard from these people are absolutely heartbreaking. This is a humanitarian crisis because of the understanding across the globe that we now have an open border here. There are people being drawn here. They're being abused. There's all kinds of just horrific, terrible, terrible stories. And this is not a good thing for our country. It's not a good thing for these people. And it is unsustainable.
Yeah, the number one question I had before he alluded to it there was, how are they getting here? Right? I mean, you mentioned the shippers, talking about historical immigration. Like, who's bringing the people here from Bangladesh and India and Africa? And
Catch an airplane, man.
Yeah, all you got to do is have a travel visa to go somewhere else, and then go somewhere else from that somewhere else, and then you can get.
Because that right there is basically the edge of the wall. Like the wall's
actually
not completed
right where
right, and they're just walking around that edge and then coming in, right?
I've spent a decent time in Mexico, and that's actually right where we crossed was Yuma, actually. So that's kind of cool. But there was no wall then. It was during Obama years.
It's the Great Trump Wall right there.
So you think? I mean, are most of these
Excessively
people
high.
well resourced enough to afford an international plane ticket?
Oh yeah.
Like that's how they're getting here. They're just flying to Mexico and walking across. I mean, aren't there like convoys of buses driving north from?
There are convoys
South
coming from
America
Central America that are coming up.
Yeah, and you gotta, I mean, the investment. All they have to do is get to the border, right? So I mean, and that's could be greatly costly. But I mean, if you think about it, I mean, $2,200 probably if you really, really went cheap, right? I mean, and we're talking about, we're not talking about really nice flights. We're talking about pretty, kind of sketchy flights. You're talking about a lot of walking, right? And $2,200, you could probably get across the world, right? The thing that's really holding them up often, from my understanding, is exit visas to get out, and then entry visas to get in places, and that's really what's holding it up. And I the situation to me is seems really, really clear, and the fact that what the issue is that you need to know where these people are coming from, where they're going, who they are. The reality is the largest growth in the American economy also coincided, just so happenstance, with the largest growth of immigration in all of human history that's been recorded. That's not a coincidence. It's competition in labor markets that drives up quality and drives down prices. And this is the fundamental thing that Marx does not understand. And to me, it's the fundamental problem with all types of protectionism. And that protectionism has, the lack of protectionism, it does have costs. Free markets hurt. But the reality is if you are not advancing past the rate of inflation with the quality of those goods and those prices of those goods, everyone loses. And the current status quo of having an illegal addiction to illegal labor, and then an addiction to these cheap goods that are artificial, that's really bad, because then if somebody does step in and quote fixes it, that's going to hurt bad. Because imagine the industries that would be affected.
Well, the fix would have to include getting rid of the minimum wage, right? So that legal labor resident citizens could work, but also then you're faced the question of, well, is that going to be a livable wage for that person with prices where they are?
Well, that undervalues the consumer bid, right? So market clearing process is where consumers bid to. So if you have somebody who's bidding lower because they make less money, that actually drives down prices.
Sure. So say McDonald's can hire someone for $5 an hour versus 15, they can charge less for the burger because they're paying less for the labor. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Additionally, that the process of deflation is good for consumers, right? And it's typically, because of the sticky wage phenomena, good for good for employees. So the long term, if you look at the short term and an individual story, it's a little more difficult story to tell that's compelling to people. But in the long term, if you look at labor markets, what tends to happen, especially when you're not fighting inflation because of inflationary monetary policy and the Fed and all that kind of stuff, if you have a stable currency, what you tend to see is an increase in the labor market increases productivity, increases total amount of goods, driving down prices. So greater supply, greater
and innovation. I'm just going to
additionally innovation. Yeah.
Innovation, because the number of world-changing inventions that are created from 1880 to 1910 is this huge number, right? And the number that came to America with a basis of an idea or the roots of the idea, then came here and it was able to let it flourish, is this huge number of them. It's insane. And in this studio, there's hundreds of devices and objects that are amongst those, and things that we would never think of. A really good example is there's a Jewish guy from Poland who invented the baseball card, and it was this great idea of selling the likeness and the stats and this identity of this person you wanted to be like. And it was this poor Polish Jewish immigrant that's like, "Ooh, we should print these," and that made a huge amount of money. And so, there's more complex things. There's people like Tesla, but the reality to me of the situation is that it's a perfect example in teaching. It's why we make too much now because the system just costs so much. There's so many hidden costs, that things that you don't think about. How much does administrator cost? How much does the upkeep of, so we have continuing education credits we have to do. How much does that cost the taxpayers? I have no idea, but it's a lot because there's a lot of teachers, right? So it's not just the wage. So it's like the wage. We don't get paid enough. A dude out there picking avocados, I guarantee you that bro doesn't make enough. I don't know what that would do. I have worked with migrant students in Flathead, teaching them math actually in the orchards, and they don't make enough. That sucks because if those things burst, they make zero money, and that's just if it's hot and it rains, and then the cold water causes the cherries to burst, and now they're out all of their bonus money for the year. There's no way you make enough for what that is, but that's just reality. That's a reality that we can do nothing about. And what it does, if we don't have competition, you'll have continually hidden costs, and those hidden costs grow. So now, what are the hidden costs? We have no clue what industries would be just crumbled if we cut illegal immigration today. It would just crumble our economy. In the same way,
I mean, probably agriculture.
You think
agriculture at least.
You think housing is expensive now?
Construction.
Yeah.
Do you like it? The answer is yes. Probably affected. And so to me, it's the same thing in education, right? It's not a competitive market being a teacher. There's tenureship. There's all of that, which is creates a non-competitive market. And so there's all of these hidden costs. The foremost people point out, they love to point out, like old teachers that are a billion years old and they're, on their 40th year of teaching, they don't do anything. It's just search of words and things like that, right? That's the upfront cost. Everyone can see those, right? The fact that, you can be a teacher in some districts and the tenureship is so strong that you basically can't be fired unless you're smacking kids around or something. And those are costs, right? But to me, it's all of the additional costs that come down that road that you have no control over, especially the really small things like the quality of teaching that you could never prove, right? Those are going to be those huge costs. You don't believe in institutions? Well, I mean, yeah, I wouldn't either if I wasn't actually involved in creating those institutions. If I was an illegal immigrant or just an immigrant that couldn't become a part of the system, why would I teach my kids to be a part of the system? Why would I do that? Why would I value that system? And if you give them skin in the game, maybe they would. At least that's what all of our ancestors did.
Yeah.
And they were hated. I see you got red hair.
Oh, yeah.
No Irish need apply.
Yep. Absolutely.
Hatred. Germans, hatred. Italians, hatred. Jews, hatred. Eastern Europeans, hatred. And it was passionate. And when they were here illegal, and a bunch of them were, especially all them patties, a lot of those dudes were illegal, right? And they would just pop on in, and people hated it because what did they do? They drove down prices in competition of labor. So shove them into the Union Army, and hopefully a bunch of them die in the war.
But Russ, they'll change our culture.
Yeah, they did. They made America. We have a different culture.
We invented cussing.
We invented St. Patty's Day. Yeah, taking that back, Ireland. Ours is actually sick. But they don't even have corned beef. You ever have corned beef?
I was in Ireland less than a month ago.
They don't have corned beef there.
I didn't.
Corned beef is the product.
Beef. I'm trying to remember.
Corned beef
sure
is
it was
the
on the
product.
menu somewhere.
Do you know the story of corned beef?
No.
It's the most American story ever.
Let's hear it.
No, hit it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So correct me if I'm wrong.
I will.
So once again, you have to read Renegade's History in the United States by Thaddeus Russell. It incorporates a lot of these stories and talks a lot about this. But corned beef is a part of a Jewish cooking process with a cut of beef that Irishmen use.
Yeah, it's the cheapest cut of beef.
Yeah, the cheapest cut of beef, right? So it's associated with Ireland. They would use that because they're lower income. So what happened is you have these ghettos in the East Coast that were full
New
of...
York City.
What's that?
New York City.
New York City specifically. That would fill up with immigrants, Jews, and
Certain
Irishmen.
ethnicities created certain neighborhoods.
Yeah, and they would intermingle. And there was more than that I think we anticipate for a lot of the way we think about those eras. And one of the innovations out of that was corned beef, which became a staple of Irish food only in America And it might have cross-pollinated back to Ireland, possibly.
Sure.
Yeah. I didn't see it when I was in Scotland at all. But
I don't think I did.
yeah. But it's a uniquely American thing, along with a ton of the way our language is different than England is because of the Irish who came over and invented almost all of our cuss words and fun words that we use.
All the good ones.
Thank you, Irish immigrants. Thank you.
Joe's like, that's my people. We're innovators.
Tate was trending on Twitter. I want to know what that's about.
I think he had to. Well, he just had that big interview with PBD, right?
Is that all it was?
Yeah. So he was on with Patrick Bet David, Valuetainment.
I think it got pulled
That's a
into.
terrible name.
I think he got pulled into court again today or something too.
Oh, right.
So I think it had to do something with that.
Who cares about that? All right. So the New York Times has a new story out. Get this. They read a story that anyone who's known anything about Ukraine for any amount of time already knows. Its national government is leveraging some of the worst aspects of its own racist history to prosecute this war. Quote, Nazi symbols on Ukraine's front lines highlight thorny issues of history. Troops use patches bearing Nazi emblems, risks fueling Russian propaganda and spreading imagery that the West has spent half a century trying to eliminate, end quote. It's the New York Times. And it was like, I might have been 2 weeks ago, but it was such a huge thing because it was like the first thing I knew about Ukraine before this whole thing started, I was like, wait a minute. Wasn't the government like just elected a Nazi just like 2 minutes ago? Wasn't everyone freaking out about that? Like just a little bit ago, the same year in like 2016. And because and I was a little bit off. It was actually like 2014, 2015 when this happened.
2013, I think.
Yeah. Where they elected this cat who was, had the whole arm in the air thing. I'm not going to do it.
Don't do it.
Definitely some
Hail lobster.
association with some very. Yeah.
Oh no, I'm sorry. 2013 was the Euromaidan revolution. I'm sorry.
Yeah, but it was after that. It was
my
the
bad.
government elected after that.
I think you're right. I think it was like 2017.
Yeah.
I think you're right. Yeah.
So, and it wasn't like the main guy, but it was guys within the cabinet and major guys around it. And it was like, there was articles written at the time about how controversial this could potentially be. Meanwhile, we had the whole, I forget her name, the release call where she says, F Europe. What's her name? She's popular in the State Department. She's been around forever. Oh, it's like right on the tip of my tongue.
Old woman in politics.
She's not that old. She was really relatively young at this point.
Nancy
I
Pelosi.
think she's my age, actually. Think about it.
Dianne Feinstein.
No. This is
I know like two people.
Was it Victoria Nuland?
Victoria Nuland.
She's
yes.
way older than you, man. Oh, really? Yes. Born in 1961.
Oh God. Why did I think that?
She's been around forever. She's been like big neocon for like
Yes.
when you were in high school. She was a big neocon.
Yes.
Right?
Okay, I'm sorry. I was thinking someone else. So, anyways, as far as that, she got recorded on this after the revolution that they claim was completely organic, but we definitely know that the NGOs and other organizations were associated
Nazis.
with. And literal Nazis.
The Euromaidan is a nationalist movement. Nobody in Europe is like confused on who they are.
But nationalism's bad because Trump.
Nationalism is bad.
Is it also bad in Ukraine?
Yeah, it's bad everywhere.
Why would it be bad in Ukraine? They're the good guys.
Dead people. Lots of dead people.
So that's the crazy thing is like the people in the United States are still seeing this. Unfortunately, they need to listen to the podcast. They're still seeing this as good guy Ukraine, bad guy Russia, and for good reason, right? Russia invaded Ukraine. That's bad. But what they're not seeing is
What they're not
seeing.
seeing.
Oh my God!
my God.
Come
What
on.
they're not seeing.
He walked right into that one.
Ouch! So we can't drink before the podcast.
Evan is sad. Oh no, he's happy.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Evan's
loves
giving
the
the
dad
thumbs up.
jokes.
It's good. It's good.
Oh, the joke meets with approval from Evan in the back.
What they're not seeing.
What they're not seeing is that this is a much longer, detailed story that has to do with the United States and Russian relations. Obviously, we don't want to go on the whole thing, but at least a component of this is for some time, both the prosecution of the war in the Donbass was done by literal fascists, like people who believe in National Socialism, people who claim credit from their grandfathers' participation in World War II. Yeah.
Actually, Islamo-fascists in the case of Georgia, right? The vast majority, there's two parts to that war. There is the part that is more, well, I mean, they're just not Muslims, right? And then they're I think they're Orthodox, but I'm not 100% sure on that because I know that has deep ties to Russia. But there's the Christian side, which they're fascists. They want a Georgia, and they've wanted a Georgia for a very long time. And because there's purges in Georgia during the Soviet Union as well, or during Stalin's reign, that was, not as numerous as Ukraine. But then there's the other side, which is Islamofascists, and they want a separate state from the other Georgian state. And that was one of the key parts to Russia actually winning that war, is that there was at times factions that would divide and not work well together, and then also apparently fight each other. But I'm not sure if that's 100% true. But that's one of the things that I've read, is that they were a very ununited front, and they thought the same thing was going to apparently. This is a conjecture of a historian. He seems to think that the Russians thought the same thing in the Ukraine, because there's some deep ethnic divides east and west, and that so many of those ethnic Russians should have switched sides, but they didn't apparently. So
interesting. So there's the factor of these guys who, since from the Minsk Accords 1 to 2 to the present day, have been prosecuting a civil like war. It's hard to describe it. I mean, what do you also call having a civilian population where everyone just kind of gathers up and like shells them from a distance? Civil war? Is that fair? But there's not really an army on the other side other than that, made up of a few people from that area, militias, and potentially Russian troops also being injected into that. Are you familiar with this?
I'm confused on what you're talking about.
In Ukraine.
In Ukraine?
In Ukraine. There's the Donbass region.
Yes.
Yes. Donbass region is ethnically Russian.
What is that? In a breakaway state. There's a term for that.
Yeah, right. You're on board. Yeah, that's right. So they actually voted to leave, to go to Russia, all that kind of stuff. So,
but Russia rejected them.
Yeah, right. Which is interesting.
It just shows you that they want something that they're not getting.
Right.
So the Donbass region voted to break away from Ukraine and join Russia, but Russia said no.
Yeah,
and now
no
Russia
unequivocally
is invading to supposedly to claim it.
No.
But
see, that makes no sense.
That's the narrative.
Well, that's the narrative.
But if what you just said is true,
read a history book.
Then that doesn't make any sense at all.
Wait. So also keep in mind, a lot of time went between these two things too, including a lot of people died from the shellings by literal Nazis in Ukraine. Like these kind of private militia might be the best word, but effectively it's like a group of guys
they're Nazis.
Who are believe in a ethnic Ukrainian state, who don't like them because they're Russian and speak Russian and are ethnically Russian. Additionally to that, they have this history with their grandfathers in World War II and all that kind of stuff. And additionally to that, there might have been, and there's definitely pictures of Lindsey Graham and other senators talking to these guys, encouraging them in what they're doing prior to the Russian invasion, because the forces in Donbass were connected to the Russians. So it was like a proxy war of sorts, where the U.S. was backing these Nazis to shell this group of ethnic Russians while they were being, marshaled and potentially by proxy groups that are probably from Russia. Although I've never seen like hard evidence of that. It's been claimed pretty universally. So I think it's
there's a pretty easy piece of evidence is weaponry. Yeah. So you got to remember, like in wars in like Syria, wars in like Lebanon, right? Wars in Iran, right? Wars in Iraq. You have these wars where you have nation state actors, and then you have subsidiary groups that are not under the nation state on how we think of it. You have to remember, and all listeners should read this book. I just got so many books. I'm sorry. It's called Weird. It's a book of psychology, sociology. It's amazing, but it explains how strange the Western worldview is, and how it's a product of a long, complicated history. But one of the things we think of states as these super monolithic things, that how could you have an army that doesn't listen to the general of the country? But in the rest of the world, outside of Western Europe and North America and in kind of sort of other places, that's actually the norm. If you think back into ancient times, how often was there a coup when that one leader gave too much power to a general, then the general rose up and killed the leader, and then now I'm the leader, right? That's actually the common. That's the run through. Actually, that's the more narrative part, and so that's what's happening to me here. Ukraine does not control all Ukrainian forces, and if people think that, again, read a history book, because that's not how that works.
I got a lot of hate in the comments on a short about this. Yes, I was talking about how decentralized things seem to be and how factionalized seem to be, and I was just hypothecating on that. The Ukrainian yelling at me. I've been told
he's not Ukrainian, but he's at least a volunteer that speaks the language. We've invited. I think it's a man. I'm not sure, but we've invited him on the podcast. He's has yet to respond.
He ghosted.
He did initially agree, but so it seems like you're substantiating that claim. That
100%.
Well, it's just the norm of how these things always work, right?
That's what happens. I'm not making a claim of knowledge that I know what's going on the ground.
Sure.
I have no idea. But what I do know is in like the war in Syria, I once mapped it out for my students after reading an article. I had 7 different colors of markers, and I was drawing dashed lines for support, direct lines in red for aggressive war, purple lines for support but not actually directly fighting. And I had, in the war in Syria, I had 47 different groups up on the board with lines interconnecting, that when my teacher neighbor came over, he's like, "You didn't like try to teach that to them, did you?" And I was like, "Yeah, I did."
It proves the point, though.
Yeah,
but it proves my point now. I don't think anybody really understood what I was trying to get across at the time. Probably wasn't my best teaching moment, but hey, man, they got the real deal.
Hey, you got to aim high, though.
Yeah, you do. It was way too high. That freshman history class was like, no, I'm just kidding. They were juniors. But no, I mean, so the reality is that's just so common in history, where these factions break apart because they're not united. So, I mean, we think of cultural differences like, religion, and we see them as very, very minuscule things, right? We often do in our society. Guys, we don't have to go very far where that is not the case. If you are not Catholic, you're barely even a person. You're definitely not a citizen, right? In the case of, Eastern Europe, if you are not a certain branch of that Orthodox church, there's a different Orthodox church for most of the countries that they're in, because they have like a bishop system. And it's kind of like if I understand it correctly, which if I don't, sorry, but it's like a more decentralized Vatican, right? And it's in the countries that they're in. So, you have a decentralized way that way, so it becomes nationalistic, even the religious aspects of the same faith. So it makes 100% sense what you guys are saying about these factions breaking apart. That's has to be what happened.
Something that you said earlier about Russia going in and kind of expecting to get a bunch of people on with them reminds me of what happened with Iraq. Wasn't that the situation in Iraq? Was like we had like an insider guy that was like, "Trust me, we got all these like militia groups. They're gonna jump on board, and we're gonna have like awesome Iraqi freedom." Boom, nailed it. And then we went in, and the guy turned out to be an Iranian spy, just kind of like luring people in or something. Wasn't that the story?
No, it wasn't that. It was the same guy who sold the Kuwait babies and incubator
That's
story.
right.
Also sold the story that if we go into Iraq, there's going to be all these people who are going to
The Kurds.
Yeah, who are going to welcome us and celebrate our coming and all that kind of stuff. And we're going to join into a liberal democracy.
Because they were...
No, well, I mean, the Kurds weren't totally bummed to see us. I mean, I'm sure they're one of the only factions who...
Well, they've been bummed to see us at times and not bummed at other times.
Right.
But I mean, I know that's the case with the Northern Alliance in Afghanistan. And then, and that's why prior to 9/11, Al-Qaeda had camera bombs, actually. And they blew up a couple of people.
Before I forget, to get the story on that cat, and I can't remember his name, and I can't remember exactly all the institutions in here, definitely check out Enough Already by
Scott Horton.
Yeah,
he's got all that information.
I haven't read that one yet, and I feel bad. I'm sorry, Scott, if you're listening.
It's quite excellent.
I know you are. Your other book, though.
Oh, it's very good.
Dude, good job.
Well, safe to say, you're probably thoroughly confused by a lot of this, and that makes total sense, because I think it really just does illustrate how completely confusing foreign policy is.
It's all a shit show, right?
It's just a complete shit show, and there's so many factors. There's so many different pieces of the puzzle. It would be insane to think that you could fully understand it, let alone act rationally in a situation such as this in Ukraine, in the Middle East, or anything like that. Especially as a country where we have our own problems at home, and we have our own situations to consider and resolve here. And so, if anything, if you take nothing else away from this really interesting and probably very surface level analysis of all these different cool like foreign policy situations, just know that it's probably a case for not getting into really entangling situations in foreign countries. And we should probably pay more attention to what we're doing here in the United States and less to what's going on between several different factions in some country far away that probably has not very much to do with us and our way of life.
Well, and there's something to say about that too, as like a mechanism of control, of understanding, of like people at the top that are like, yes, we need to do this, rah, rah, war, they hate us for our freedoms, whatever, stuff like that, is like they're banking on the average citizen not understanding of like, okay, well, this is the Taliban and this is Al Nusra Front and this is ISIS, you know, like they're banking on you not understanding the dynamics of this. And then they can create a noble lie that is just like, and that's why we got to do this.
Right. And I'm not saying that you guys didn't do a good job of explaining it, because I did follow a lot of it, but I do think that there's just so much to it that it's just like, man, you really do need a degree in history or political science, or, you know, you need to spend years studying this to really understand the depth of it. And no wonder why people kind of glaze over, because it's like, there's just so much there. It's hard to wrap your mind around all of it. But it's really important that we not, you know, forget about it or shove it under the rug, because this is the majority of what the United States budget is being spent on, is military interventionism.
Well, the best example of that right now is Nikki Haley running for president, right? Where it is, I mean, she is the neocon choice. She's out there saying, if we don't do this, Putin is Hitler and he will take over Europe. Like outright lies, like that would have no grounding in reality. We have no idea. She has provided no evidence. If this was Trump saying that, it would say Nikki Haley claims without evidence that that he's capable of doing this, because there isn't. What evidence do they have that suggests that that's actually a capability of the Russian military, or an aim or a goal or anything else other than her claiming it?
Well, I thought
why didn't they invade Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia, which were much stronger military targets, much better, because then you get more access to the Baltic Sea. You cut off any support that's more direct line to Moscow and what is that? I almost said Leningrad. What's it called now?
Leningrad.
History teacher.
Sorry, guys.
Not a geography teacher.
It's called Stalingrad now.
St. Petersburg. St. Petersburg. I got it. That's to the south.
I mean, and more, to your point as well, you know, every other breath, I feel like the neocons are also saying Russia's a paper tiger, and they don't have the military strength or the unity in their forces to accomplish any of this stuff.
Putin's simultaneously the most crazy person who ever lived, right? Or he's an insane tyrant, and he's also mentally failing, and he's the most dastardly political devil that ever existed at the same time too.
Did you guys see? Because did Chris Christie jump in the race? Or he was getting intervied. I feel like
I think he did. Yes.
Yeah. Does anybody care?
Round up Mike Pence and Colonel. What's his name?
Colonel West on the left.
Yeah.
Which I actually think is interesting, and I have thoughts on that.
Sure.
But Chris Christie, like in an interview this week, he was in Trump's administration, and he's basically in their interview saying that, like, yeah, no, I told him he shouldn't be a Russian puppet. Like that's basically the substance of the interview. You're like, Mr. President, I don't think you should be a Russian puppet, man.
It's a bad idea.
I think it's a bad idea that you should listen to Putin all the time, man. Like that's basically what this interview was, and so it just shows like the neocon element. But
one of the things that I just absolutely despise is that as soon as you're trying to explain the actions, and I feel like I'm taking crazy pills, because it is the same thing with Al Qaeda, right? Like you're trying to explain, like, no, there's reasons why they hate us. It's not just freedom, right? It's because of interactions that we've had in the past. It's because of history. It's because of these things that have happened, and then you're, for some reason, then I'm a fan. I'm a apologist for Al Qaeda, right? In the same way that's like, now I'm a fan of Putin, because I'm like, he's doing these things for rational reasons that are completely wrong, and he's a bad guy, but he's doing these for reasons that are directly tied to our actions abroad. And then you're like, so you like Putin? Why
are you defending him, Russell?
Yeah. Makes zero sense. But yet we can go back in time and say, ooh, look, in the 1930s, in the interwar period, these are the things that Hitler did, right? And these are the things of why he did them. And they totally connected. Every history book has this, like talking about the Weimar Republic, talking about, the scapegoating of picking Jews as these reasons why they lost the First World War. Everyone's perfectly comfortable with that. and nobody's like, "Hey, textbook, why do you like Hitler?" Hey,
He's just a man that wanted.
Hill,
He's just a
Hill. Do you like Stalin? Why are you explaining it so well?
Why are you explaining it so well?
got a point.
If you're a detective and you're looking at a crime and you catch the killer, what do you need?
Motive and opportunity.
Means, motive, and opportunity. Material evidence.
Oh,
ideally.
I forgot about the means part.
Yeah. So you have to be available to do it. You have a motive, a reason to do it. The material evidence is you have to have like a how you did it, right? It's the candlestick in the library and you killed Colonel Custard, right?
I never bought that.
Mustard,
Candlesticks
but
aren't that hard.
What's that?
You can't kill somebody with a candlestick.
Well, not like the candle itself,
Not with
but
that
like the
attitude.
holder.
Yeah, I get it.
They're pretty heavy.
Really?
You know, they make them out of all sorts of stuff.
How many candlesticks do you have?
You could burn him.
None.
Exactly what I mean. I don't have a lot of range of experience with
That's true.
candlesticks.
Again, not the wax part, guys. The metal part.
You just driven it. Ow!
You might never put that together, man.
It's just not the wax part guy.
It's like, wouldn't the candle just break?
Never really got that.
It's burning them slowly. Ow!
So there Putin was with the candlestick.
God, what was I talking about?
I don't know, but we've
Foreign
just
policy has the
destroyed
same.
all of our credibility.
Foreign policy has the same thing. What you're trying to do is get the means, motive, and material evidence that actually help you understand the phenomena, so that then you can design strategies to push back on that phenomenon. For example, if you were to say in the early 1990s, hey guys, if we keep our current policy in Iraq, perhaps it will inspire a bunch of people to attack us. People would be like, you're just apologizing for the, Iranians or for whatever, or for Saddam Hussein or whatever, rather than saying, okay, what is the strategic analysis of the region and the incentives for people to hate America? And then how do we mitigate that as a foreign policy goal? And perhaps if that analysis was done and it was discovered that the starvation of 500,000 Iraqi children, as well as the actions of supporting of Israel and some of the bad things they've done, good things too, but they've done bad things. The support of Israel has inspired a lot of these people. Perhaps you would have stopped 9/11 before it could have happened. Now, a lot of people will strategize about how they could have stopped Hitler if they had just gone back and, killed him as a baby and or, made different policy during the Weimar Republic or after the Paris Accords. If you can do that and everyone's like, oh yeah, that totally makes sense. But if you do that on 9/11, all of a sudden you hate America, right? We don't like to take responsibility for our actions as a country. And like Jordan Peterson says, if you're going to change, you got to take responsibility first. And that's what we need to do as a country.
Just a quick fact check. It's Munich.
Munich. Oh God. I was like, I looked at you when I said it because I was like,
Yeah, I was trying to blink out Munich.
Yeah,
Morse code.
Agreement.
Munich. Sorry.
It's okay.
After World War I.
This is why every group, every podcast needs a historian.
Absolutely.
Just hanging out and be like, actually.
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 Waving at glasses.
Well, guys, it's been a really great conversation. Anything left to add before we wrap it up?
I really want to do the youth one because I got something I want to say.
Oh,
yeah,
yep.
This is a really great video. I'll cue it up while you do the thing, Kyle. This is really great. So one of the reasons I want to talk about this is because Russ's job, he has to deal with these teenagers every single day. Get to. Has to. Did I say has to?
Yes, you did.
Oh, well, that shows you my mental model on teenagers. My bad. My children are younger than that, although I love my niece.
Obviously, you're looking forward to it.
Yeah, right? I mean, ish. So they're cool now anyways. And this phenomena of youth suicide, and I thought it was really awesome video. I'd love your response.
All right, here we go.
You got to unmute it, Holmes.
Well,
Kyle doesn't know how to
They're
use social
teenagers,
media.
and when you're a teenager, you're supposed to want to die. But that death is supposed to be metaphorical and spiritual. Your childhood has to die so you can become an adult. But nobody's told them it's metaphorical and spiritual, so they have this death urge that they then actualize in the physical world as opposed to through ritual or through maturity. I've often thought that it's similar, that this culture is so wretched and so many people are so very, very unhappy. They want this nightmare to end, and they don't recognize that the death that they want is a cultural death and is a spiritual and metaphorical death, especially because within this culture, the spirit is separated from the earth and from the flesh. And so, you can't have this transformation that simply occurs in your body. And so they kill the world in all physical reality as opposed to that spiritual transformation.
Thoughts?
Yeah, so I mean, I found myself very torn on what he's saying, because in aspects I see what he's saying is correct. As somebody who works with high schoolers constantly, that they need to find an identity, and in order for that to happen, other things need to fade to the background. I think the problem and how he talks about it is this very binary, that things are alive and things are dead, and that's not how you evolve. I mean, think about. So for me, I was thinking about like my evolution into a man and my evolution into the different stages of my manhood into my life, right? And the things didn't die in me, right? Things became less emphasized, right? The characteristics I gained from my mother and from my father and from my siblings, they didn't die in me, but they altered, right? And I think if you're talking about this, and the dangerous thing is if you're talking about this is there's twofold. One, you're creating a youth of rejection. And I don't think that's necessarily a good thing. I don't think people should reject things outright. I think people should measure, weigh, and test things and then decide for themselves. So I think the idea that he's promoting ends up in a lot of rejection and a lot of, this is not who I am, but this is who I am, which teenagers very much struggle with. They are, you could consider almost similar to a bipolar person, where it's like one day I'm this, and then now I'm really into anime, and that's all I am, and then the next day it's like, no, I'm not into that, and I'm into goth music, and this is all who I'll ever be, and I love Anna, and she's the one for me, and they can't modulate, and that's what they're figuring out what to do. They're figuring out how to take a little bit of A and a little bit of B and a splash of C, and then take away actually a little bit of B. That was a little bit too much. So I'm just going to take away a little bit. And you do that through ritual. And that's where I agree with this gentleman. It seems like he's pointing to a more ritualistic and spiritual existence. And I agree with him that has died in our society, and I'm very sad for that. To me, that's a very, very negative thing. And that would be something that needs to be remedied. And so, yeah, I found myself torn with it, but I like the idea.
I think that's a lot of the reason, because so much of our political culture now is wrapped up in identity. I'm this, I'm that, right? And I think a lot of that is just people are kind of scapegoating things. They're trying to like figure it out. Like they're just like, I'm this, so I have to be this, and then they need you to justify it. So like everybody's like, it gets very preachy about it. And that's kind of like become such a big part of our cultural identity. It's like almost like high school is continuing to go throughout adulthood, where everybody's like obsessed over of like, I am this thing,
So there's been an observation that over time, childhood has gotten longer and longer, right? And maybe a hypothesis is that is continuing, like that childhood is now until you're 28. Or something like that, where people have.
That's my age, man.
Welcome to adulthood.
Am I an adult now?
Sorry, you're an early mature. What I mean is that there's maybe 28 is not the right one. I'm just throwing out a number.
I mean, like college in a lot of ways for a lot of people is just extended childhood, right? Like some people will use it for like actual educational purposes and stuff like that, but a lot of it's just childhood extended, really,
with alcohol.
Yeah.
Well, and seeing this gets to another symptom that I think is problematic, is that often people look at your teenage years and they look at that time of life and they see it as this transition that was like this necessary evil, and it had these really deeply bad things, but maybe these good things too that were sprinkled in, maybe. But the reality is you're not fundamentally that different from what you were in high school. You just hide it better, right? You've been socialized more, and you figured out different parts that it's like, okay, when I walk into the party, I don't have to do a kickstand immediately. I can do it second then, right? And you figured out little tips and tricks into fitting better into what you want and what those things are. And I think that's what we need to have. I think you do need to transition from proper childhood into young adulthood. I think that's sociologically very, very well established in most hunter-gatherer societies and most long surviving societies. But I don't see that's what he's talking about. He's talking about adulthood
I
proper.
think he's actually talking about that too, right?
think so?
Yeah, I got that sense that's why teenagers specifically are the ones that are kind of in this transition where they're de-emphasizing childhood and trying to adopt, adult responsibility, but they're not being told that that's a spiritual action, right? Yeah. And so therefore they're kind of taking it on their physical and that being some kind of underlying psychological driver of the suicide issue with teenagers.
Carl Jung had a concept called persona possession. And the general idea of it was that at a young age, you learn to adopt these masks so that you can properly, engage with society. It's kind of like, this is this mask for this moment. This is this mask for this moment. But then a lot of people kind of forget that they're wearing the mask, and then they forget to kind of like peel it off at times and kind of remember who they actually are. And then people become possessed by whatever mask they've kind of claimed as their own, and that's not really them. So they're kind of like, they become trapped by that. That was kind of making me think of that old Carl Jung thing.
Yeah, right. That's an interesting concept. And I think that at least with my personal experience with working with teenagers, it seems pretty true. You are constantly trying things. And those trying things, I think to me, where I see kids go wrong is when they take things from the past, they take things from their parents, and they reject them so hard that when they take the mask off, continue with the analogy, they rip off a part of their face. And it's a part of them that's actually them. And it's something that they believe in and they have, because I think we have devalued belief so thoroughly in our society because of the dogma of scientism that anytime we touch on belief, people, well, that's just your belief. That's just subjective, right? And so devalued that if you have belief, and everyone does, that's the dirty secret. Everyone has a bias. Everyone has belief. And if you do, it's this devalued thing. It's like, well, no, it's just you, and that's not something that's important.
Pardon me.
Way to interrupt the moment.
Sorry, man. I really tried to hold it back.
It's all that
totally
vaping you're doing.
No, come on.
I got to throw you under the bus.
There's the cultural death
Heavy
too
metals.
component of that I thought was funny. The cultural death element of that there's like, we're talking about institutions and how institutions themselves need to transform over time and how they need to die off. And that there's like this hesitancy that people have, like that perhaps in the past we had institutions that were more accepting of this, that you were a thing and now you're not that thing anymore. And we're going to recognize that and like kind of reinforce a new set of norms based upon you're now a man, you're 13, here's your bar mitzvah.
Or hazing rituals with tribes and things like that.
Right. Things like that. So, but we don't have that for the Fed. Or, the
I would
intelligence
love to
agencies.
haze Jerome Powell.
But right, what I mean is like a way to think about that. Institutions aren't necessarily permanent, and that they need to have a purpose and then die off. And there is no thing that allows these institutions to die off. If you want something to be immortal, just make it a government program.
Yeah, like that's the Milton Friedman quote, right? Is there's nothing more permanent than a temporary government program.
That's Ronald Reagan, actually.
No, it's Milton.
Pretty sure it's Milton.
It's Milton. Okay. But no, I get a little stuck there because I view myself kind of like an old school naturalist. I don't like to always think of myself as a historian because I love so many other topics and fields as well. But to me, like this screams like one of the solutions, and what David's kind of pointing out there is like the old school naturalist position, which you would say, okay, so what do human beings do in general? And so you look and take the sociological view, and you'd figure out, okay, so generally we transition at this point of puberty, and then you're a man. Well, I don't know about you, but I don't want 14-year-olds to vote, right? And that sounds bad.
I'm not sure I want 21-year-olds to vote.
That's what I was trying to tap into. And so I think in one element that I would say that what we need to do is we need to be very, very aware of the institutions we create. And we need to create belief-based institutions. And I don't necessarily mean religion. I mean things that you believe in and you value that signify the transition for people to say, you're no longer a kid, you're a young adult. You're no longer a young adult, you're an adult. And we don't even have good words for it. And I think the creation of those, I think we need to take further steps. The answer isn't backwards. The answer is forwards. The answer is to evolve. And I think the devaluing of belief fundamentally is the issue that I see there. It's a spiritual transition that people don't recognize is there because it's spiritual and you can't do that.
Woo-wee. So I do want to know too that when we're talking about institutions, we include voluntary institutions. We include taking institutions that are currently non-voluntary and making them voluntary. And that is the opportunity of the moment, is that we have this moment of death of these involuntary, corrupt, ossified institutions in our culture that can be revivified in private institutions that are voluntary, that serve the common good and do a better job about having the appropriate incentives in order to exist and serve the larger society, like any institution, like your business or like your family or like anything else. You as an individual serve the common society by a harmonious interest of your behavior and how you actualize the real world. And then, I do want to note too, like, I think I totally agree with you, Russ. I think there's the next step is to move forward, not necessarily back. But we use the past as a reference, right? Yeah. So if you're a parent and your kid is turning that 11, 12, 13, 14 years old age, and they're going into that phase, and if you want to inoculate your kid against the kind of pressures of the outside world, what does that look like? What are the sort of rituals that you can build as a family that help inoculate that so that they can grow up to be a kind of whole rounded human being who is capable of engaging with the world like an adult?
I'm trying to think of the guy's name. Steve Ranella, the meat eater guy.
Yeah.
His book on rearing children had a section of it that kind of tapped onto that real briefly. No, it did. Yeah, it touched on it, I think. And it's a good idea because he's talking about engaging in kids. The book's all about engaging your kids in wild spaces, and it's a good book. It's a great book. I think that has an element of it, right? So if you're kind of a naturalist family, I think you should engage in the wilderness in a special way that'll be a symbol and a meaningful experience to transition them from where they are into this next stage of life. In the same way, you have a wedding, right? You're transitioning from the solo person to this merged person, right? And that's a meaningful thing. In the same way, you have, graduations and those things, but often they're tropes now. They're silly. They're not meaningful.
They've lost all meaning. Yeah,
I think
completely see what you're saying.
I think they can, but you have to create one.
Yeah, no, like they've just become like things that you just do. Like the meaning has been stripped away from them. Like it's just like I just feel like this is what I'm supposed to do at this time, and nobody like kind of like meditates on what that actually means and kind of integrates
no one even ever
into
explains
their life.
It to them, right?
Which is maybe is like the marriage, just as an example. Maybe that's a reason why the divorce rates are so crazy right now, is because like people aren't actually integrating the values of that tradition into their actual life, and it just kind of becomes a thing you do, right? So like people aren't as committed to it, I guess, or I don't know what you would describe it as.
Possibly. I think the important thing, and when I think about this, I'm mainly focused on youth, is for me, it's like, my seniors just graduated, right? And I remember my first year that I had these kids from freshman, sophomore, junior, senior. I sat in the back and I like got teary-eyed. I was like, man, why am I so emotional right now? I'm like sensitive. Like my buddy was all joking with me and kind of being like, this system sucks. And I was like, shut up, man. You can't talk bad about this. So I was like overly defensive about something I don't even care about. And what I had realized is that I had this symbolism of them moving on into adulthood and beyond my tutelage that was super, super deep. And I had realized in that moment, I never gave that to them. Because they just saw me and they're like, I'm graduating. I have a diploma now. They were like pumped. But I'm like sitting there like, this is beautiful.
Well, it's the same thing as like in African tribes, they would have these rituals where it's like once you became 13 or whatever age it was, like you'd have all like the adults put on these like horrifying masks and stuff like that, and like the young man would have to like fight off the monsters, and it's like symbolizing as like, yeah, you're no longer a child anymore. You have to go out there and fight your fears, and you have to beat up the monsters. And they would like haze the young man with these monster costumes basically, and it's like, well, once you fight back, it's like, okay, you're a man now, and like this is your moment, right?
I fully support integrating that into Western.
Let's just bring it back. Let's bring it back.
I'm down.
That was a great ending.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm glad we were ended with that video.
Me too. Well, thank you guys very much for a great conversation. Russ, thanks so much for joining us today for 2 shows.
History
Marathon.
Stick and on Instagram, History Stick. I forgot to say it earlier. History_SHTICK.
History stick.
History stick. It's a mouthful. Thanks
Gotta use
again.
that Yiddish.
That's right. Got to do it. Kyle, thank you, sir.
Of course.
Appreciate it. Evan, thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Wherever you are watching or listening to this, we do appreciate a follow, a like, and all that lovely stuff. And we appreciate you for watching. See you next time.
See you.
Thanks for tuning in to the Liberty Portal podcast. For more episodes, news, and Liberty-focused content, visit libertyportal.com and be sure to follow us on Twitter and Instagram. If you like what you heard on the show, we appreciate you sharing it with your friends and giving us a review on your podcast platform of choice.